Okay, I see 9 o'clock. I think we can get our meeting started. We'll call this meeting to order for March 8th of the Iowa 911 Communications Council. We'll start off by introducing our board. I have one at the back of the building here. Rob, would you like to start, and then we'll go this way?
James Chambers, Large Telecom, CenturyLink.
Blake DeRucci, Iowa Homeland Security Emergency Management 911 Program Manager.
Mike Bryant from Ames, Iowa Professional Firefighters.
Tracy Bearden, Iowa NENA.
Sally Hall from Iowa County, representing Iowa APCO.
Rob Rotter, Iowa County Sheriff, representing the Iowa State Sheriffs and Deputies Association.
Lawrence Harpence, representing Iowa Geographic Information Council.
Bob Seivert, Shelby County Emergency Management and 911, representing the Iowa Emergency Managers Association.
Jack D'Angelo, Sully Telephone, representing small telcos.
Mark Murphy, Dubuque 911, representing the Iowa Firefighters Association.
Wayne Johnson, CenturyLink, representing Large Telco as an alternate.
Tom Berger, Dubuque County 911.
Rebecca Barlin from the Iowa Attorney General's Office, represent Iowa Homeland Security.
I'll let them get settled.
Tammy Rodriguez, ICN.
Andy Buffington, Hancock County 911.
Terry McClanahan, Dallas County Sheriff's Office.
Chris Myers on the SWIC.
Doug McCaslin, Warren County 911.
Crystal McIntyre, Warren County Supervisors and 911 Board.
Dwayne Voss with Raycom.
Curtis Pione, Polk County Sheriff's Office.
Okay, thank you. And do we have some folks on the phone that could introduce themselves? Perhaps not.
Stacy Gross, Stacy Gross with Geocom, sorry.
Brenda Vandervoort, Fayette County 911.
Lori Hickok with Comtech is on.
Okay, very good. I believe we have our agenda or our quorum. Can I entertain a motion to approve our agenda? So moved. Is there a second?
I second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. And the same for February 8th minutes. Have a second? Did I hear a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Okay, Blake, could you give us our Iowa Administrator report?
Certainly. Thank you and good morning. Ethan, if you could put the slideshow on. Everyone settle in. I have enough to talk about that I actually put together a slide presentation to organize my thoughts and make it a little bit easier for you guys to follow. Last month, I briefed that the FCC report, fee diversion report, had not been released. I checked immediately following the meeting, and I found out that I was a liar because it had been released that morning. So I wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. No diversions were declared for Iowa for 911 fee diversions. That should make Iowa eligible for any upcoming National 911 Office grants, which actually are becoming available late spring, early summer. So we should be fully able to apply for those grants. Last 2011 or so, Iowa did receive over $1 million the last time that grant was offered. So we should be an excellent candidate again. And just a note there, we must stay off that diversion list for the duration of the grant program as well. It is worth a read. The link is there. More so than anything, just to familiarize yourself with how other states manage 911. There's a lot of good information there. Might be good reading right before bed so you can fall asleep, but it is kind of a good, interesting report and might be worth your time. Other report that was dropped last week was the biennial, every other year, audit of PSAP expenditure collection data. So that's the form, the 8-page spreadsheet that PSAPs turn into our office annually that lists all of the expenditures at the PSAP. So one of the things that the auditor's report buried a little bit, but it was definitely in there, was they did not find any misspending of funds. So all of the 911 surcharge that was listed was spent appropriately, so that was my positive takeaway. Also, they noted vastly improved methodology, including the report form, the instructions, the training that went on, and the intake process. As part of their process, they audited 10 PSAPs by going to the PSAP and basically asking the PSAP directors, okay, show me your supporting documentation. Hopefully the PSAP directors or whoever helped fill out the form was able to provide that supporting documentation. They did 5 desk audits, basically asking PSAPs to send their supporting documentation via email or other method. And then 5 PSAPs were basically followed up from the previous report, so from 2016. So I think they audited 10 PSAPs in 2016. 5 were followed up on to note any improvements. So again, this is a 2-year report. The data is submitted annually, but the auditors look at it every 2 years. So in 2015 to 2016, there were vast improvements, but the range of what they looked at, a PSAP, a single PSAP underreported $800,000 and overreported over $1 million in 2015 and 2016. The numbers, like I said, were much better. The worst of the worst was 287,000 underreported and 840,000 overreported. So again, a significant improvement, but those numbers are still a little bit wider than we'd like to see them. It's interesting enough, and I think this held true in the very first auditor's report as well, the detailed data that we get, we kind of knew from the beginning is kind of a moving target, maybe not the best. But the aggregate totals, I think, hold true and are still a good representation of how PSAPs are funded in the state. So a couple recommendations from the auditor's report that I want to talk about is continued and ongoing training. They mentioned to us that will probably be a recommendation every single report that they do, just because it's always going to be with turnover and just reminding people the purpose of the report and continuing to improve upon the data that is turned in. So for those PSAP managers here, just wanted to take a couple seconds and go over some of the high points on kind of the training aspect to this and where I and the auditors think that things can be improved just on the training piece. Reminder that the form, the expenditure is supposed to be on an accrual basis. Keep your documentation. That's a huge one. A lot of the PSAPs that were audited couldn't provide any supporting documentation, and that's a little bit silly to me. You had to get your numbers somewhere. How did you get your numbers? Just put it in a binder, put it in a folder, put it on a shelf, and wait 2 years. And if you get asked for it, bring out the folder and there's your documentation. So even if it's handwritten percentages in the margin of a pay sheet or a utility bill, however you come up with those calculations that you're reporting on the form, keep it and maintain it. And again, if you ask for it, you have it and it's available. Engage your county auditor. That was a big one too. Everyone does things a little bit differently. If you're perfectly capable of doing your budget as a PSAP supervisor, great. But there might be some better resources out there for you to help and to do things a little bit more standard. So engage your county auditor if you can. The utilization of a standardized chart of accounts, again, it's one to ask your auditor about. They do this on a fairly regular basis. Pull information from your 911 account. It's all of your expenditures for your 911 fund should be right there. And this is one that I didn't know anything about, but the auditors pointed out to me to help to report on the sheriff's fund specifically, how much funding is pulled from the sheriff's fund. If you use Department 5, function 1040, it should have all of the information right there. Again, that was new to me. Ask your county auditor. The other one that they suggested for a recommendation was legislative changes. They didn't really have any good suggestions per se, but they just kind of pointed out that by the time this is actually due, it's been about 9 months since the end of the fiscal year. So the data is a little bit stale at that point. And they suggested penalties for PSEPs who submit inaccurate data. I don't know a good way of doing that, especially if they're only going to audit 10, 15 PSEPs. I don't know how you enforce something like that. But we have reached out to them to see if they would be able to work together with us to just brainstorm some ideas behind that. But if we get anywhere, we would certainly bring that back to the council for assistance and input prior to just running up to the Capitol and making those suggestions. Again, I don't know how you penalize the PSEPs when not all of them get audited. Right now, as you're aware, and I'll show it on another slide, there are penalties for not submitting the data, which we've used in the past, but there's no penalties for submitting bad data. So somebody could literally submit a form to me with zeros across the board, and their form's been submitted. So just something to think about. Not looking to institute anything now, just kind of as we work forward with the auditor's office on improving the process. The data itself is also due to the legislature. The first report was, there was a required lengthy report and analysis behind the $1 surcharge. That was only a requirement for the first year, or for the first report. After that, basically all we had to do was report the data itself. So these are the highlights, at least kind of my takeaway. It's been remarkably similar between these 2 years, and even if you go back to 2013, 2014, the amount that funds a PSAP really stays around that 24, 25, 26% out of wireless surcharge funding. The other 75% comes from other mostly local funds, if it's the county general fund or the sheriff's fund or other funding. It's remarkably similar over the last 4 years. Again, this data helps me greatly. I have 2 national reports to submit, one to the FCC, one to the National 911 Office, and I feel like we're one of the better states that has a grasp on exactly what it costs to run and manage 911 in the nation. A lot of the numbers that are submitted are much lower because the state office or whoever it is that's submitting the state data doesn't have the full picture or can't get the full picture, whereas we can. So the most recent form, FY17, is due March 31st. Technically, it was due to us January 1st, but the legal due date is the March 31st. So at that point, if we don't receive the forms, we are able to start withholding 35% of quarterly surcharge. You can see the 5 counties that still need to submit that for the year. Any questions on the auditor report? We didn't receive any media attention on it this year. The previous report, 2 years ago, we probably received 5 media inquiries, but it was substantially worse 2 years ago. So I think the methodology improved, the data itself improved, and the report itself was better. So I'm guessing that's why we didn't get any media inquiries. I'm really glad to report that part of it. But if there's any questions or any thoughts that come to mind?
I have one, Blake, and I'm not sure if it's from this data that you, in the past, had made mention of, and I may use the wrong terminology here, but the amount of unobligated reserves. And so I've been watching, at least my county, and I know they have taken heed to that and designated those funds or reduced the amount of unobligated. Do you have a rough idea where that's going or headed?
It is actually two different things. That is more on the Department of Management budget form that every county has to submit. So the counties are in the process of getting those budgets approved now. I go through a process then of rolling all of that information up and compiling it for statewide, so we know exactly how much counties are budgeting from the wireline and wireless and what they're expending it on within just the surcharge. So I'll be happy to report on that probably in May.
Yeah, thanks. I wasn't sure where you got that number from. I'm sorry for the
Nope, you're good.
question.
You're
but
good.
just
It's a good question. Again, this data basically is all encompassing. What does it cost to run a PSAP? The budget form from the Department of Management is how you're going to spend just your surcharge funds.
Thank you.
Yep. We go back to perfect. Any other questions on the report itself? I have a few more things.
Just one thing, is that report that you just showed us, is that available to anybody who?
The audit, both of them are. Both the audit report, which I sent out far and wide, but the data itself, I was trying to remember, just because that data is due to us, it was due last March, but we didn't have to report on it to the legislature until January. I couldn't remember if I sent that out. I certainly can again. It's a massive spreadsheet, and like I said, I easily can. You'll want to look at it on a computer. It's not printable. It's not, you can't look at it on your phone, but I can
think
send it
just
out.
basically what you just presented though is, it's very, very interesting how, I don't think people realize how much of their local budgets are affected by this, and I think it helps to get people involved in 911 and take it seriously, because it is quite a bit of our assets, no question. Thank you, Blake.
Yep, no problem. I can send that out again, or for the first time if I haven't.
Okay.
Oh, I have a few more things.
Okay,
Sorry.
go ahead.
I wanted to report on the $100,000 fund for council and public education and training. I have a detailed breakdown here for the board members, but the highlights are up on the screen. Again, this is $100,000 to cover council travel, public education, and training for PSAPs. So far, we've expended $10,000. We've obligated about $50,000. So what remains is $39,000. This month, you can see the two requests that we have totaling $18,000, and I know we'll talk about that a little bit later in the agenda. So if both of those are approved, there would be $21,000 remaining. And again, that replenishes, starts over the beginning of the fiscal year, so July 1st. So, you know, if these are approved, we'd have $21,000 for what basically amounts to April and May left. I can't imagine us approving much in June, just because they have less than a month at that point to get the training actually accomplished. So. One thing to point out, you're perfectly capable of seeing it yourself, but the Gold Line Success training has been done a couple times already. Everything I've seen has been highly successful, well attended, and also the ethics and legal and officer down has been requested. I can't remember if the first one has actually occurred. I think it's a little bit later in the month, but it is in a different part of the state. That one was Cerro Gordo. This is South Central Iowa, and I believe it's going to be held in Union County. So just food for thought there. I think this is my last slide. Just update on legislation. Kind of a couple emails back and forth the last couple days, but just wanted to touch base on it. House File 2254 is actually identical to Senate File 2307. The House version passed 98-0. The Senate version passed out of the first committee, got referred to appropriations, which has kind of happened the last couple of years. It's not really that big of a deal. It's more of a procedural thing. Initial subcommittee meeting in appropriations was supposed to be yesterday, got postponed to today, and then they're actually going to substitute the House file version instead. Just makes it a little bit easier to get both bills through. They're identical at this point. still, no amendments have been put on. So as far as I know, it's still a little bit pretty much smooth sailing. Just maybe got delayed an extra week, 2 or 3, while it got re-referred back to appropriation. So it was really on the fast track and just kind of pumped the brakes a little bit, but still not expecting any issues. Any questions? And just a note, I will be out the next 2 weeks, Monday through Wednesday.
I do.
Question?
I do. The fiscal note that came out on that, can you talk a little bit about the consolidation grant amount and how that will change? And then at the very last year of that, if I'm interpreting it correct, there'd be about a $25,000 amount available per PSAP at the end of that fiscal note series.
I didn't bring the fiscal note with me, but I'll try to talk it the best I can. The consolidation grant amount at this point still remains at the $200,000 per PSAP. That's on the books till 2022. Like I said, there easily could be an amendment on that, but there hasn't been thus far. I don't expect that to change. The fiscal note more spoke to the potential cost savings statewide, mostly, especially at the local level, of costs that would be saved through the virtual consolidation effort. I want to say it was $3 million a year at the local level on a potential $3 million a year at the local level for CPE costs. Now that does assume 100% adoption, which probably isn't going to happen the first number of years. But like I said, it's up to about $3 million statewide that could be saved through the sharing of services. And I believe it's $1 million a year saved, again, at the local level for the merging of the wireline and wireless network. So there's startup costs involved with that. So the bulk of the costs are still there in year one. I think there's, I think the startup costs, I think that we estimated were around $8 or $9 million. But then after that, annual expenses drop dramatically because all that infrastructure is now in place. The other thing that I know is important, there's already language that's on the books that will basically make us zero out that operating surplus every year. So whatever it is we don't use, other than the catastrophic reserve, gets zeroed out every year to the PSAPs. So if there's, at the end of the fiscal year, if there's $7 million remaining in the operating surplus, 3.5-ish would become available then to zero out and pass it through to the PSAPs. Just kind of like what we've done as a lump sum. You don't have to apply for it, but it's just money out the door to the PSAPs. So I can't tell you what that's necessarily going to be in the future. Some of that depends on how much the shared services are adopted. If we see a lot adopted, again, we're saving you costs, but you might get not as much on the back end. So some of those are moving targets with a lot of variables.
Thank you, Blake. Unless some PSAP GIS grant apps came in under the wire, I don't think we have any.
None for this month.
Okay. So that brings us to the training fund requests. We have one from South Central Iowa Service Board, the Officer Down Ethics and Legal Training for Dispatchers. They're asking for $16,000. And then Van Buren County Goal Line Success Training asking for $2,000. Is there anybody on the phone or here that is associated with either one of those PSAPs? No? Okay. So that was going to happen in Union County, I understand? Okay. All right. Well, if there was just anything you wanted to say about it, you certainly could. I think the training's awesome. I love seeing these training sessions take advantage of the grant. This is exactly what we're looking for, so thank you for having that. And so there's a plug for it. All right. Does anybody on the board have to abstain from a vote, first of all? No, no, sorry. I don't think anyone here is associated with it, so any discussion about it? Okay, I would entertain a motion to approve both South Central Iowa Service Board and Van Buren County requests for funding for their training.
I would make that motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? And motion carries. Thank you. Okay, anything in technical advisory that someone would like? Please go ahead.
One item here for the council this morning I wanted to share. President Trump recently signed into law legislation here called Kerry's Law. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Kerry Hunt was brutally murdered back in 2013 in a hotel room in Texas. And her daughter, one of her daughters, was trying to call 911 and obviously didn't know that she had to dial a 9 to get out, and tried like 4 times and wasn't able to connect to 911. So this legislation is designed to make sure that multi-line telephone systems have direct dial to 911 without a pre-code to get an outside line. Some of this is already in place, but this law was to define that. So I just wanted to share that with you this morning. That's all I had.
And maybe you don't know, is this legislation, does this allow grandfathering of current systems, do you know? It's something that we deal with even in our own office. We can't dial 911, which is odd. Okay. Anything else? Okay, that brings us to Chris Myers on his update of Iowa Interoperability Governance Board. Morning, Chris.
Morning. Hope everybody's doing well today. I'll try to keep this brief because I know you have a jam-packed agenda. We've been able to pass more standards over the past couple of months on the ISIX platform. If anybody is curious as to what those standards are or what they cover, they're posted on our website for reading and enjoyment. More work on standards is being conducted, including things related to pursuits, encryption, transport, and interstate interoperability, among other things. We're having another standards meeting later this month to discuss a few of those things, and some of the other things related to encryption and transport are still at the subcommittee level. So that work is ongoing. Last month, the board put out a technical recommendation which outlined a preference of multi-key AES 256 subscriber units. I wanted to clarify that that is not a requirement to buy anything, but it outlines very much in detail the nuances associated with encryption and subscriber units. It's designed to be kind of a document to help people make educated decisions on purchasing things. More or less, it lays out kind of scenarios where if you want to interoperate with other agencies that use encryption, AES 256 is probably the best way to go. The talk groups on ISIX that are going to be encrypted will be in AES 256. Federal agencies operate on AES 256, so it, based on all the information and evidence we had, multi-key AES 256 seemed like the most prudent and practical way to go. So that document should be available on the website now for review as well. There was a letter to PSAPs that was sent out to let them know that ISIX is being deployed now and will be live relatively soon. It's designed to be an informational letter. And if anybody is curious, the board is working on ways to try to assist PSAPs to sign on. My goal as SWIC is to not leave anybody out in the cold on this. And as that information becomes clearer to us on any type of assistance the board will be able to help out with, we'll make that known to everybody here as well. There were some concerns expressed to me about some of the legacy networks like LEA being shut off on July 1st of 2018. Again, that's not the case. There's going to be a transitional period, so it's not like everything's going to go dark on July 1st of this year. The board's going to try to be as pragmatic as they can be with a lot of things, and I know we've gotten some help from other agencies as well that run some of those legacy networks to let us know that everything's not just going to go dark on July 1st. So there's going to be a transitional period. Blake mentioned this on one of his last slides, but he and I will be traveling to the NGA conference in Albuquerque the next 2 weeks from now, roughly. It's going to be related to all things interoperability and in many ways 911 as well. I know I was part of the group that lobbied very heavily to try to get as much representation as we could on invitational travel to go to this so that we would be appropriately represented. So I'm thrilled that Blake's able to come along as well. I think any other state that brought their SWIC and their 911 coordinator and someone from the governor's office and their SIGB was very well represented at the last meeting in New Orleans. So I'm hopeful that we'll have a similar outcome there and that the NGA hears our concerns regarding emergency communications. A last minute audible for you all. Director Dusty Rhodes at OEC decided to extend the SafeCom survey to March 12th. He said he was overwhelmed with the last minute responses we got on some of those surveys, and by we I mean OEC. So they extended the deadline out to March 12th. So if you were in mid-survey and you didn't get it completed, you have a chance to finish filling that out. I would recommend that agencies continue to fill those out if they haven't already so we can get our mark on that SafeCom survey, because again, that's going to be a guidance document that's going to help them shape the next 5-10 years or so with regards to grants and things of that nature. Other projects that the board is working on include things like subscriber unit testing. We're working through a process with that. We think we have a rough template of what that might look like. And as that becomes more clear to us, we will work on getting that published as well and let everybody know what we're going to be doing. The RICs are going to be expanded slightly within the leadership level. One thing we've been looking at recently is how do we properly allocate workload and distribute that so that we're not being overburdening people with things. So we're going to be looking at adding vice chairs to each RIC. So then it would be a chair for each RIC and then 2 vice chairs to help distribute the leadership workload associated with that. So hopefully that'll make things easier for everybody. One last thing, the next COMEX exercise is slated for April 23rd and April 24th. It's going to be oriented around the big derecho that went through in 1998. That was the one that basically caused massive destruction from northwestern Iowa through the Des Moines Metro in towards the Quad Cities area. It's going to be a multi-geographic location event with multiple command posts. It should be really interesting. So if anybody has the means and time to participate, I highly encourage it. I think it would be very educational. With that being said, that's all I have at this point. I'll take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, usually at this time, we'd be hearing from Jim Lundstedt of Office of Emergency Communication. I don't see him here today. So that moves us on to items for discussion. I don't have anything on the agenda for that, or unfinished business as well, unless somebody else has something. Okay, that brings us to some new business. We've been asked to, as a council, to give some opinion on the idea of public hospitals, certain public hospitals, as standalone political subdivisions having a voice on the local 911 service boards. And so that does open up a very interesting question. Blake, can you give us some background on how we got to this?
Yeah. Ethan, can you show the screen up there again, the PowerPoint? Okay. I just have a couple slides just to help everyone kind of visualize what we're talking about and think through some of this. It's kind of hard to get your head around, admittedly. As part of the bylaw review process and the annual forms that get submitted to our office, one of which includes listing the service board members at the local counties, 2 counties approached our office and wanted consideration for a hospital as a standalone political subdivision. The reasoning behind that is that those hospitals are organized under Iowa Code 347. Under that code, they have their own public elections with public officers and taxing authority. They do not receive money from local government. So if you take a look at the admin rule that's up on the screen, that sure seems like what is described in as a political subdivision. For a little bit more background, there was an Attorney General's opinion in 1990 that granted the authority to benefited fire districts to be a standalone political subdivision, earning a vote on the 911 Service Board. And if you take a look, a lot of the same criteria was met for benefited fire districts. So, again, go back to the political subdivision. It talks about a defined geographic area, responsibilities for certain functions of local government, public elections and public officers, and taxing power. That gets you the political subdivision. You're a political subdivision, as Homeland Security has defined it in admin rule. The next step in this discussion is talking about, do they have a public safety agency serving territory? So again, for certain hospitals formed under 347, if you can get your head wrapped around that they may be a political subdivision, do they have a public safety agency? Well, if they have ambulance service, maybe. You're pretty close. So we reached out to the Attorney General's office, and Rebecca's here to help us out as well. Just because it's if we're going to be setting some sort of precedent, we want to make sure we're thorough about it and it's well thought out. So we're bringing it up to the council to get some opinion and get some folks to weigh in as well. One other thing that I want to bring up, and I want to put some more information behind it. One of the things that the Attorney General's office asked us to do is look through all of the counties and see what they have currently listed, to see if there was anyone already listing a county hospital as a voting member on the service board. And I found that Jackson County does list their county hospital as a standalone political subdivision and a voting member on their county service board. So I started asking Jackson County some questions about how that came to be. And they said, and they actually provided me the email, and I provided it to the council, that in 2012, our office told them that using the same logical discussion about benefited fire districts, that they could list their county hospital as a political subdivision. Now, that came from the 911 program planner, not the program manager. And I don't think it should be the sole basis for a precedent setting, for anything precedent setting, but just wanted to point out that it is being done in one place because they were told from our office to do so, for what that's worth. So I believe that Crawford County was going to be on the call to discuss this from their perspective. I'm not sure if they are or not. I don't know that I heard them during the introductions.
Anyone from Crawford County? I don't think so.
Okay. And I know there's plenty of discussion and thoughts around the council, so I would love to get everyone's perspective on the issue.
Good morning. Rob Dennert, your Vice Chairman representing the Iowa EMS Association.
I'd just like to point out that I think this is a symptom of the variety of ways that EMS is operated here in the state of Iowa. EMS is kind of unique that way, that not as clearly defined as police departments usually are, whether at a municipal or county or state level law enforcement. Fire departments, certainly same sort of arrangements, whether municipal, township-based. I don't know of any statewide fire departments. But EMS operates pretty uniquely, that certainly can be operated as part of a fire department, can be operated as a third service, municipal service, like I come from here in the city of West Des Moines, where there's a police chief, a fire chief, and an EMS chief, private companies operating EMS services, and in this example, hospitals operating EMS services. So I think it is kind of unique. I'm in support of it. I think it makes sense that in those areas where a hospital, a countywide hospital does operate an ambulance service, it makes sense that they ought to be involved in the 911 board. I'd certainly open it up to other discussion, let other people talk, but I'm prepared to make a motion to make a recommendation that we allow this.
I agree with you, Rob. The problem that came to me was I'm being asked a question, and in getting that question asked of me, I come up with 10 other questions of my own. And I guess my biggest question would be, would this compel organizations to be a part of it? And the reason I ask that is, coming from our own service board, and I'm sure everyone has the same problem, we have a real problem getting our quorums because we have so many people on the service board that have such a tiny stake in the service area that they just don't feel it necessary to take part, which is fine, but there's no mechanism there for them to opt out, so you're stuck with that number. So I guess my question would be, and it sounds like in these cases they are wanting to take part. It's not that they're being forced to. They want to take a part, and I think that's awesome. But would this force other hospitals in that same circumstance? Would it compel them to take part in a service board that perhaps they don't want to participate in? That would be my biggest concern.
It was two counties, Crawford and Humboldt, that were quite persistent in getting this this far as far as consideration. So the research I tried to do, I looked at Department of Management to see who filed under basically Iowa Code 347 or county hospitals, and also had an ambulance service, and talked to public health. The best I could come up with is about 25. This would impact 25 counties, but that's just a rough guess.
Right.
Would they have to be listed, though? I mean, to the chair's point, it's, how does
You're
that
looking
work?
at the code and the benefited fire districts and everyone else that falls under, they would have to sit. So I know that the Attorney General, when we were talking with Blake, there was some kind of, they were kind of perplexed how, wrapping their mind around how this would work. So I would like to hear the Attorney General's office has something to say on this issue. I think it would be beneficial.
Could you come to the podium, please?
While she's coming up, can we put the code back up, the administrative code? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rebecca again from the Attorney General's office. I was just speaking with Blake about this, and I don't really have a lot to add to what he's already said. We were both kind of having trouble just wrapping our minds around the definition of a political subdivision and if county hospitals would count. It looks like Jackson County does. Their county hospital does because it doesn't receive funding from the county. So that was kind of the opinion of a program manager, I guess, in the past from 2012. And that was the only hospital that I believe has voting membership that we're aware of. But I guess this is maybe the first time that they've asked for voting membership. So I can answer any questions you have, but that's kind of the extent of the research and kind of what we've discussed so far.
Well, go ahead.
I don't know if I have a question. The other part, is it in 34A that says who will be on? So I might have, but you guys go ahead with something else.
Well, I just, back to the original question is, would it compel service boards to start adding those positions onto their boards and when perhaps we don't have anybody that really wants to take part? My guess is the state isn't going to be investigating every service board to make sure that there's not a hospital that needs to be put on there. So if that were the case, I wouldn't have any issues with it at all. I just worried about that quorum is all I'm thinking of.
Night, if I could speak to that a little bit. I do have an issue with this. Two hospitals in the state have expressed an interest. And if they fit the definition of being eligible to vote and be a member of the 911 service board, then those other hospitals also would be required to participate in that 911 service board.
If they meet the definition, yep.
34A says they shall. It doesn't give them the option as to whether or not they will or not. So then that would further water down your attempt to get quorums at the local level. And then we will also have a situation where we have 911 service boards across the state that are not the same. Every service board will have a different voting membership as they go forward. And why should 25 counties allow EMS a vote on their 911 service board when there would be 75 other counties with maybe 5 or 6 different ambulance services and political subdivisions that don't get a vote? Because the political subdivision has the vote, not the fire department, not the EMS, not the sheriff, not the law enforcement agencies.
Right.
So as we go forward and we think about supporting this, I think we need to be aware of how this could affect the makeup of the boards going forward and the definition of public safety agencies and political subdivisions. This makeup of the 911 service boards has been an ongoing topic for many years. We've just never come to grips with making a legislative proposal to maybe clean it up a little bit. But I think this underscores the need for that effort to go forward and clean up the membership of the 911 service boards.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's something that we've been fighting with for quite some time, and it is a problem. And I'm thinking Iowa County at one time had a city hospital that provided countywide service. So that's another one that might have fallen under that, although I don't know how they were organized, but yes.
One other thing, school boards are political subdivisions, correct?
I think so.
And if they hire a officer to provide security, it's a public safety position. So would they then be entitled to vote on your 911 service board?
I don't believe that would meet it, because if you hire an off-duty security officer, they don't have arrest powers, to my knowledge. If it's a security company, they're not performing a law enforcement function. So in my understanding of the code, it'd be that law enforcement, that EMS, that fire function. So I don't think if we allow a hospital to act as a political subdivision, it's going to be a windfall. I don't think we're going to be, allowing everybody and their brother in with this. I don't think it's going to be one of those slippery slopes kind of thing. I don't think it will harm it. But again, it goes back to that question, are we going to be forcing other hospitals to participate in the service board that are not going to have that interest? And it goes back to that quorum question. But do I think it's going to harm anything? No. Do I think it's going to be a political windfall and allowing everybody in? I don't think so either, in terms of the definition, how the code is constructed.
It looks like 34A.3, just reading what's up on the screen. That last part, it looks like these political subdivisions are entitled to voting membership. I'm not sure if that means they're required to vote.
So, yeah,
That's what we were just talking about.
Yeah, I was just talking about that with Blake, because, and again, for reference, I'm used to writing like contract language where you get into the wills and the mays and the shells. But when I read this, is entitled to,
right,
I don't see a compelling reason. Then Blake brought up under here, and I don't know that this, it's under number 4 of some part of this, but participation in 911, joint 911 service board required. a political subdivision having a public or private safety agency within its territory or jurisdiction shall participate in a 911 service board and cooperate in maintaining the 911 service plan. Well, as soon as I read that, then it gets even more questions, as the sheriff brought up, because, oh, now we're going to talk about private safety agencies. And so,
The public and the private, if you look at the code, the public is voting, the private is a non-voting member.
Yep.
And if you look here, they're entitled to voting, which means they were able to abstain from voting membership. So let's say you have, with the emergency manager, they may vote or they may abstain from voting membership, but they have to participate as a part of the service board.
right. So, but do we have, again, do all private entities have to participate? Because I bet they're not doing that.
By code, yes, but there's no teeth to it.
Right.
So are there teeth to the shall participate for the public?
No.
No? So to me, I mean, again, before this meeting, I was looking at, okay, where's Pandora's box here? You know, what are we opening up and what are we starting and where does it stop? And then the other is, and I don't know that any of the people that are asking for this are on, but my question is going to be, well, what's your reason? Why? What's the advantages? What's the disadvantages? I don't know what kind of answer we'd have got. But, hey, we still got legislation. If we hurry, we can end this meeting and get down and add an amendment. We'll get her done. But yeah, I agree with the sheriff that I now have more questions so far at this point than I had answers.
Somebody, I think the chair mentioned, you know, us going out and investigating to make sure everyone is complying. That's not necessarily what we do at the moment. You know, we make sure your bylaws and your service board membership form align and make sure there's nothing totally wacky. But it, you know, the way the code reads, it's up to the service board to figure out who's who in the zoo within their jurisdiction. Yeah, I'm not gonna go investigate the organizational paperwork for all 99 counties times law enforcement, public safety, fire, benefited fire, hospitals. I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah.
I
So,
think it's really just when questions come up, we try to be consistent with our answers, which is what it looks like with the benefited fire departments, similar to this. As long as they meet kind of that definition that's in the administrative rules.
right.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, we do have a motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion? Do we have yes, Rob?
Did somebody know how many hospitals are organized under this 34/7 or 347?
Again, the best that I can come up with that are organized that way plus have ambulance is around 25, but that's the best I could come up with. Because, I mean, there's some that are filed under 347 but don't have ambulance service. So they're a political subdivision, but they don't meet that next part of having a public safety entity.
State your motion, please.
I was prepared to make a motion.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And what will the board, what will we be doing? Acknowledging this?
The board is an advisory council to our program. And I think that's what we're looking for is advice on this topic. There's a whole lot of folks that have been around a whole lot longer than I have in 911 and I don't know if anyone was around in 1990 talking about benefited fire districts, but whatever that history was or that discussion might have been, I think is relevant in advising us to help this discussion with the Attorney General's office on kind of our recommendation going forward and trying to set something that's a little bit more precedent setting or at least a statement of how we want to go forward than an email from the program planner in 2012 that went out to one person.
So is it something like the language of recognizing and acknowledging hospitals organized under Iowa Code 347, providing EMS as political subdivisions for the purpose of membership on a joint 911 service board? Boy, that sounded good, didn't it?
I don't have a slide for what you just said, sorry.
I was reading it off this one. Are you ready, Sally?
Yes, sir.
I would move that the 911 Council acknowledge and recognize hospitals organized under Iowa Code 347, providing EMS as political subdivisions for the purposes of membership on a joint 911 service board. You want me to do it again?
We're still going. I'll get it out
Okay.
there.
Any further discussion? Yes.
I would like some time to bring this back to the organization I represent before we would make a position as a council. I happened to see it yesterday when I opened up my agenda and shot that off to our association president, and we've had a little conversation about it. But I think, you know, it bears a little more discussion on our end anyway.
Any other discussion?
Yeah, a question for the pleasure of the person making the motion. Do we want to include the part so it's very clear, those EMS ones that have ambulance service? That is the criteria. I mean, it's.
I did. I think I said, hospitals organized, reading right off the slide here, hospitals organized under Iowa Code 347, providing EMS or ambulance service. We could add that in there, EMS or ambulance service.
Makes it a little more clear.
That's fine. I'm good with that. No, that's fine, adding it. I don't think we have a second yet, though.
Do we have a second? Going once, going twice? Okay. The motion dies for the lack of a second. I think maybe in light of that, it probably would be good for all of us to check back with those that we represent and see what their opinions are and bring this back to our April meeting for further discussion based on what we learned from those folks.
Do we want to table that? Is that how that works?
I think we're tabling it, yes.
I would move that we table it till next meeting.
Very good. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion carries. All right. Travel requests, unless something else has come in that I'm not aware of. I don't think we have any. Any business from the floor? Any business on the phone? Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our meeting. Have a motion to adjourn. Second? Do I have a second?
I move. So second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.
Sorry, my legal.